Joining me now from the Australian city of Hobart is Greg Barnes, a legal advisor to both Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. And in Washington, D.C., we have activist Shanon Lee, who is a member of the Rape, Abuse and Incest National Network. I thank you both for joining us. Greg, let me start with you. So the U.S. presenting the evidence, detailing the charges, justifying the extradition attempt. Tell me why you think this is more about politics than justice.
Well, I think it's more about politics in this sense that the initial indictment, and I think the last time we spoke, was indicating a charge which had a maximum period of imprisonment of 5 years. We've now moved into the terrain of charges which haven't been used in the context of the media and journalists in modern American history. And furthermore, would seem to be charges which amount to an act of vengeance on the part of the United States security establishment against someone who has revealed some truth about what happened in Afghanistan and Iraq. And we note, of course, that these charges have not been laid against any of the other publishers and authors of material. For example, the Pentagon Papers back in 1971. This is unprecedented in modern times.
And Greg, in addition to the United States going after him based on their claim that he violated the US Espionage Act, the Swedes reopening the investigation into sexual assault allegations. Do you see the two as part of the same campaign?
Well, I think there's no doubt it's part of the same campaign, and I say it for this reason. In relation to the Swedish matter, it wasn't a case that they had to wait and see because there might be new evidence. They waited for a month before deciding to seek to reopen one of those investigations. One can only assume that there was enormous pressure on the part of the United States for them to do that. And I think that the decision of the Swedish court recently, which indicated that there was no need for a further detention of Julian Assange, given that he is detained, indicated the overreach and the overzealousness of prosecutors in that particular matter.
Shanon Lee, are you swayed by any of these arguments that suggest that all of this is part of a coordinated, concerted campaign against Julian Assange?
I'm not. All of these allegations stem from 2010. This is an Australian citizen who's basically evaded the law in several different countries. Even the Prime Minister of Ecuador accused him of harassing the staff at the Ecuadorian embassy. So this isn't somebody that we're talking about. This is a nice and fuzzy gentleman. I agree with the judge who sentenced him to 50 weeks in prison and stated that he's been exploiting his privilege and position and basically evading the law.
Shanon,
in terms of his...
Certainly.
Yes.
Are you open to the idea that he might be guilty of one and innocent of the other, or are you probably more inclined to believe that the guy's guilty of both charges, both from the Swedish side and the American side?
I can really just speak to the allegations in regards to sexual assault in Sweden, and there are several women that came forward, and if he is so innocent, he should, go back and face the charges.
Yeah, Shanon, do you think that it's plausible that some arms were twisted for the Swedes to re-up this case now, as was suggested by Greg earlier on? They've dug it up now, conveniently at this particular time. Would you hang a question mark over that?
Not particularly. It really doesn't have any bearing on whether or not he did the crime. There is a case that basically has not reached its statute of limitations. They have until 2020 to bring charges, and just because he has been accused of committing a crime in another country does not mean that he should be able to skip out on charges from Sweden.
Greg Barnes, so again, I'll ask you a similar question to what I asked Shanon. It's totally plausible that, yes, Julian Assange did release this information in the public interest. He could be defined as a journalist and so on. But separately, he might have raped someone. He might have done something terrible in Sweden and he needs to face justice. Would you accept that?
Well, I don't think he's got any problem, and he's never said that he's got any problem in answering questions and in clearing his name in respect of this matter, as he did in relation to the other sexual assault allegation. it's the process that's been followed. It's been a very early process that's been followed by the Swedes. They made the point in relation to one of the matters that they were content at the end of the day to go to the Ecuadorian embassy in London and interview him. For some bizarre reason, they didn't interview him in relation to the other matter. And then suddenly, with, we would say, some pressure coming onto them, they've decided to reopen this second matter. But he's never said that he's not prepared to use the expression face justice in relation to the matter. He has a justifiable fear that if he were extradited to Sweden, that the Swedes would hand him over to the United States. That's been his reason from day one.
Do you buy that, Shanon?
I really don't. And I can really only state the words from one of his alleged victims, Anna Arden, who came forward and said that she does not believe he has taken accountability or responsibility for what he's done, for any of the sexual misconduct. And I agree with that.
I want to look a little bit at the politics of this now, Greg, and look at perhaps Assange's intentions. Was he naive to think that the Ecuadorians were going to protect him forever and ever?
Look, I don't think so. And I don't think so for this reason. As a matter of international law, once a person has sought asylum and been granted asylum, then that asylum remains. It's not something that can be removed from a person without just cause. And there was certainly no just cause in these circumstances. I think what happened was that he got caught up in the internal politics. He didn't himself, but he's a victim of the internal politics of Ecuador. I'd say this, though, that you introduced me as, and I certainly have been done some legal work for him. I'm now moving into a role in Australia where we're seeking to run a campaign in Australia, which is to have the Australian government involve itself in this matter. And the reason I say that, and it is relevant to your question, and that is you have an Australian citizen who sought asylum, who was granted asylum, and then who suddenly finds that asylum is withdrawn for political convenience. And that should be of great alarm. It is of great alarm, I think, to a lot of Australians. And, I know on this program in the past, I've talked about the role that the Australian government could play if it wanted to play it in relation to the Assange case. And now, more than ever, that is required.
He seems to be unwell. At least that's what we're hearing from the lawyers. He couldn't make his court appearance. I mean, the question remains, is he unwell because, well, he's just not very healthy, or are they treating him badly? What do you think, Greg?
Look, his father, to whom I'm very close and with whom I spoke yesterday and today, visited him and gave a news conference afterwards, as did we, the Chinese artist. And I just repeat their words. That is that he has lost a considerable amount of weight. Certainly, he's had to spend some time in the Belmarsh Prison Hospital. And of course, someone who has been detained inside without any access to natural light for 7 years, going into a tough prison environment, means that one's health is unlikely to improve rapidly. So his father has that concern, but did make the point that his health seems to be stabilising. He's remarkably resilient. But it ought to be of concern, I think, to most people. And as the UN rapporteur on torture said, the conditions that he's had to endure and the conditions he's currently enduring are really problematic.
Shanon, presumably you'd want him to be treated well and for his health to hold up so that he can face justice, whether in the United States or in Sweden.
Absolutely. And the latest reports that I've read were statements from his father, who stated that he was in stable condition and that he is prepping to move back into the general prison population. So it doesn't sound like that is a concern here.
Okay. Greg, I want to ask you a big picture question here, because the implications of the conspiracy are really vast if everybody has been swayed by the Americans and everybody has been in on the act, whether it's the Ecuadorians or the Brits or the Swedes. Is it really possible that the United States has gone to such an extent in order to get Assange back in America because they're out to get him for political revenge?
I don't think it's a conspiracy. I think, and I live in Australia, which is a nation which is been rightly criticised for being joined at the hip with the United States, and we know in this country the power that the United States exercises in relation to Australian citizens who get into trouble overseas. There's no doubt that the United States have been running a grand jury process for a long period of time at some considerable expense. There's no doubt that they have now thrown the book at him, and there's no doubt that they are laying charges which have in modern times not been laid against a journalist or member of the media, or of anyone for that matter, who's republished what would be regarded really as material that is in the public interest and in the public realm. And so you would have to say that there is a great deal of zeal and determination on the part of the United States to see Julian Assange in that jurisdiction. And you'd also have to say that if you look at the comments that have been made by American politicians over the past 10 years or 9 years, you would say that there is a great deal of resentment and a desire for revenge. Now, does that involve Sweden? I don't think it's a conspiracy to say that nations which are close to the United States are lent on continually. And as I say, we've certainly seen it in the context of Australia, and I don't think it's too much of a leap to say that that's the case in the case of Sweden. Now, the last thing I'd say to you is in relation to the United Kingdom, it does have a robust judiciary, independent judiciary. This case, I think, is a real test for the United Kingdom justice system, because it may be that the United States has overreached here in the way that it has dealt with the matter, but that's a matter for the courts.
Certainly, Greg, sorry to interrupt you, right? But if
that's all right.
If he does get extradited, why not roll the dice? Because what came out from WikiLeaks turned a lot of public opinion against the United States' military adventures in Afghanistan, in Iraq, especially that video, Collateral Murder. The embassy cables turned a lot of people against the government's policies in the Middle East and elsewhere. Why aren't you confident that the system is robust enough and fair enough for a jury to find him innocent? He's not going to be tried in Guantanamo Bay.
But he's going to be tried in Virginia. And John Kiriakou, who was also tried in Virginia and who knows about what it's like to be tried in Virginia if you are accused of leaking information concerning the security establishment in the United States, knows that you're very unlikely to be acquitted. And the reason you're unlikely to be acquitted because juries in Virginia, in that part of Virginia, are drawn almost exclusively from the local population, which is, of course, friends and relatives and ex-defence force and security state personnel. And again, I don't think I'm being alarmist about this. I think that there's a very common view that it would be highly unlikely he would get a fair trial. The United States has a robust legal system in some senses and in some ways and in some jurisdictions, but this is not one of them.
Greg Barnes and Shanon Lee, I thank you both for joining us on the Newsmakers.